Hello and welcome to the first ever Photoshop tutorial on YouTube ever. That's right, this has never been done before. I'm the first one to do this. But in all seriousness, thank you for taking the time to come and watch this video out of the millions that are already out there. This video is part of a new series that I'm calling How'd You Do That? Where basically I just take a bunch of different art projects and stuff I've worked on and essentially show you how I achieved a certain look, effect, or style. And in today's video, I'm gonna be showing you how I achieved this cool looking planetary explosion, whatever you want to call it. So the first thing you want to do is obviously open Photoshop, and we'll want to go ahead and create a new project. And so for this one in particular, I did 2000 by 2000 pixels. I like working in a square shape for whatever reason, but you can go ahead and make it whatever size you want. I just like this basic size for all the things that I do. Obviously, if you want it to be a much higher quality image, bump up the resolution. And so we'll go ahead and create our new project. We'll just go ahead and call it Planetary Explosion 2. So the process of going about this is actually a lot easier than you might think. Essentially, I have two images that I use. I have this one that I found on Unsplash that I'll link in the description below that I really like to use for this. So go ahead and we'll bring it into our Photoshop document. And the first thing that I like to do is go ahead and create a copy of this layer just in case, we kind of reach a point of no return. I have to go back and use it for some reason. I always just have an extra waiting there in case I need to use it. So the first thing we're gonna do is determine the color palette that we want to use. I'm gonna kind of try and match this red that I used in this one. And so there's kind of multiple ways to go about doing this. The first thing you could do is go to your adjustment panel, which if you don't see, just go to Window, Adjustments, and then we can just kind of mess around with the hue and saturation here. So here I can kind of get this red. I can increase the saturation if I want to, but it's still got all this purple stuff that I don't really want. So if we create a new layer above the layer that we currently have and we switch the blend mode to color, and then if we go ahead and select whatever red or whatever color you want to use for this, you can go ahead and color over it, and now it's going to change the image to that color that we want. And the other thing we can do is we can go ahead and maybe add in a little bit of orange like the original one has. Add that to the edges. You can go back, add some more red, but this time I'm gonna bump down the opacity of the brush. That way there's more blending between the two colors. I could even take the eraser, bump down the opacity there, and just kind of, let's bump it down a little bit more. And that way we can just kind of create a blend between the two colors. And this can kind of be done however you want, whatever colors you want to use. I'm just kind of going through, messing around. Kind of the more colors, the better. I mean, it depends on what you want. We can always go and adjust this later. The other thing I'm going to do is kind of darken the edges of this. For this kind of thing, it kind of helps. That's a bit too dark. For this kind of project, kind of helps if the dark areas are dark and the light areas are light. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. And another thing I'm gonna do to kind of increase the contrast here and just make the darker spots darker is I'm gonna go ahead, open up the curves tool and just bring it down. And in fact, my recommendation is make it darker than you probably think you should, just because it's gonna make the next step a little bit easier. In fact, I'm gonna take the whites down a little bit as well. So like right there, I think looks pretty good. And so the next thing I'm going to do, select all these layers that I have and merge them together. And then I'm going to duplicate it twice. So this bottom one here is gonna kind of be our safety, similar to what I have this one here for. And then we're gonna have these two layers to kind of create this planet that we have right here, as well as this explosion looking thing in the background. So if I take this top layer, I go to 3D, new mesh from layer, mesh preset, and sphere. It's gonna create this cool looking planetoid thing. And so the first thing we're gonna wanna do is turn off the shadows right here. That's gonna get rid of the shadow right down here. And the other thing, you can kind of see it has this white background right, or this white kind of outline. I personally don't want that. You can keep it if you want. But to get rid of that, we're just gonna go to this preset right here, select unit texture, and now that's going to get rid of it. And so the next thing we kind of want to do is just find an area of this planetoid thing that we have that we really like and want to use. I recommend finding an area that has both a good mix of just this darker area as well as the lighter areas. So I kind of like, sure, we'll go with this right here. This looks pretty good. And then essentially once you have the spot chosen that you like, you'll go ahead, go to your layers panel, right click, and convert this to a smart object. And so now we have our planet looking thing right here. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the layer below this. We're gonna go back to 3D, new mesh from layer. And this time we're gonna go to depth map 2 and we're gonna select plane. And so now what this is gonna do is gonna create that cool explosion looking thing we have in the background. We're also gonna turn off shadows for these, and we're also going to switch this over to unit texture. And so now we're gonna kind of dolly it in to bring closer, and then essentially what you're doing is you're just determining, you know, what you want the explosion in the background to look like. You can kind of rotate it, pan the camera a little bit if you want it to be kind of like that. And then basically I recommend keeping this planet up. You can kind of plan where you want it to line up with this planet looking thing that you've created. And so you're just gonna spend some time determining what you want. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and go with this. And then we're gonna do the same thing we did where we convert this to a smart object. And now we have kind of like our planet and we have that explosion looking thing in the background. Next thing you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna go up to Window, Workspace, and switch back over to Essentials, because when you create those 3D layers, it automatically switches your workspace to the 3D default. So I'm gonna switch this back to Essentials and continue working from there. And so essentially what you're gonna do next is you're going to take this one. I'm gonna do what I've done previously, duplicate it, and have this layer as a safety, like I said before. And then we go ahead, take this, rasterize it, because then essentially what we're gonna do next is we're just gonna take our eraser tool, bump it up to 100% opacity. I recommend having the hardness at 0. And then essentially I'm just gonna go through and erase part of the edges of this planetoid thing. And it's gonna look like those explosions are now coming out of the planet. And I'm not gonna do this everywhere. We still wanna kind of maintain, you know, the shape and hardness of the planet. And so you'll kind of see when I do it over here, you know, the explosion's kind of going in this upwards left direction. And that's obviously not what we want across the entire image. So if I take a couple steps back, the other thing I sometimes do is I'll take this background layer that we have, duplicate that, and then we'll transform it to where now the explosion there is going in the direction that we want it to be. We'll go ahead and call that good, and then I'll switch this to, there's a couple different options you can choose from. I'm gonna go ahead and use lighter color. Now you'll see we kind of have two different background layers. This top one is for this lower right explosion, to call it, and this bottom one is for this top left one. And as you can see, it's kind of a mishmash of a bunch of stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and rasterize both of these layers. And now for this top one, I'm gonna go through, get rid of all this unnecessary stuff that we don't want up here. And then click this bottom one and get rid of all this unnecessary stuff that we don't want here. And then here's where you can kind of determine, you know, how much stuff you want everywhere else. Like let's say I don't want these little things right here, go ahead, erase those. If I don't want these, I can go ahead and erase it. This is kind of up to your interpretation and opinion, but once you're satisfied with that, you can now see that we have the explosions going the directions that we want them to. And now I can go back to editing this planet, and now I can just work on making it look like these explosions are coming out of the planet. And so now it's just a matter of going through and kind of fine-tuning where all this stuff is. And you're essentially just going through these 3 layers that you have here and erasing certain parts to make it look like these explosions are coming out of the planet. All right, and once you're kind of satisfied with that, it's kind of just a matter of making those little adjustments wherever you see fit. If you've decided you don't like these colors anymore, you can open up the hue and saturation, kind of mess around with that to maybe get some different colors that you want. Another thing that I like to do sometimes is if you kind of want to add more depth to this planet right here. You can go ahead and duplicate that a couple times. See if you like those effects. Sometimes messing with the blending modes might create something cool. This is kind of where you can get into the experimentation part of it, where you can really make it your own and do whatever you want with it. Well, this is essentially the basics of how to get here. The other thing I like to do is kind of bring in this layer of stars just to give it, you know, more of that space feel. You can go ahead and do like linear dodge, add, or lighter color. And now you have these cool looking stars. Feels like it's really in space. And then if it's too much, you can always bump the opacity down. You can always mess with the levels here just to kind of help it blend in more. If you want to mess with the colors, you can always mess around with hue saturation. Go ahead and do what we did earlier. Create a new layer, switch the blending mode to color. Choose whatever color you want, and now you can go through, recolor it all. Like right now, I'm making it blue. Or another thing you do is mess around with gradient maps. Those can sometimes create cool looking effects. That's not a good example, but let's see. See, like, yeah, that looks pretty cool. And so you can go ahead and do some stuff with that. Or another good thing that I like to mess around with are these color lookups. These are just a bunch of cool different color filters. Some of them can often create cool looking effects. Like that one I think is pretty cool. That's pretty cool as well. And so yeah, at this point, you've essentially, you know, created the planet explosion, and now it's just a matter of going through and messing around with the different settings that you would like to create. So hopefully you enjoyed this tutorial. Hopefully it all made sense. If you do have any questions, or if you're like missing some features, or I did something that didn't show up, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll do whatever I can to help answer those questions. This is my first kind of Photoshop tutorial. I know it's probably rough around the edges in some places, so if you do have any feedback or areas that I can improve on, please let me know and I'd be happy to do so. I plan on doing plenty more of these in the future, but if you did like what you see, go ahead and show your appreciation by hitting that like button. And if you want to see more from me, be sure to go ahead and click that subscribe button. As I said, I plan on doing plenty more of these in the future. If you do have anything in particular that you would like to learn how to do, go ahead and let me know in the comments below. Be sure to also check out my art page. A lot of what I'm going to be doing in future tutorials is essentially taking stuff that you see there and showing you how I achieve those effects. But thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.